My name is Tom Edwards. I'm a principal modeler in our consulting team, and I'm joined by my colleague, Craig.
Hello, my name is Craig Lowrey. I'm a principal consultant in the consultant team, and we are looking to have a general conversation about what's happened in the wholesale natural gas and electricity markets, particularly natural gas, over the last 48 to 72 hours, looking at impacts from a general investment and overarching perspective, and looking a little bit on the potential impacts on bills and a bit of hypothesizing about potential broader impacts as far as the energy system globally is concerned.
Following the United States and Israel's attack on Iran, there has been a significant change in the wholesale price of gas in European gas markets. This is driven by fears over the ability to ship liquefied natural gas out of the Middle East, specifically through the Strait of Hormuz. Because countries like major gas exporters like Qatar are behind this strategic waterway. And during a conflict, both their installations and those vessels transiting that area are going to be under risk. We have already seen, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, but currently gas prices are around 150 pence per therm for month ahead gas in the UK.
Well, I mean, they've eased off a little bit since, well, at least a little bit from that. But yeah, in terms of like the order of magnitude of the increases that we've seen, it's maxed out at a virtual doubling of front month. Obviously, that's cascading across summer contracts, also the winter contracts to a lesser extent, but it's still material. And then the general step up across the curve is still apparent, but obviously comparatively smaller the further out you go.
And that's really important for Europe in particular, because we're heading now into kind of recharge season. So the summer months are for buying lots of gas in to refill storage over the summer so that it can be there ahead of winter. There was a European law to have all gas storage stocks in the EU at 90% full by the 1st of November. That's been slightly relaxed to, I think it's somewhere between October and December, 90% has to be reached. And a country can also can miss that by up to 10% in case of extreme circumstances. So that's the context of why we need to buy loads of gas in the summer, and why a price rise now is going to be particularly hard and kind of cascade through not just the immediate supply picture, but it's actually going to cascade into next winter, as that's gas that we've had to purchase when somebody needs to make a profit on when it leaves the storage as well. I was going to just talk about what we think this means in terms of like the investment picture, the wholesale market prices, and the energy transition. We think that there might be kind of two rough outcomes here. Is you're talking about a limited military intervention that lasts a couple of weeks, maybe is over by Easter, in which case we could see gas supplies return to normal, shipping rates return to normal. And that's the situation in which, there is some sort of negotiated settlement fairly quickly. And then the alternative is it's a longer war, and we are having to spend significant amounts of money ensuring vessels transiting through conflict zones and convoying those vessels with military equipment and protecting LNG trains and oil refineries in the region. And that just generally feeds through into an increase in costs. The transmission variable here is that most of this gas, in terms of, say, the Qatari output, is going into the East Asian economies. So the ones mostly exposed here are places like Pakistan, Japan, Korea, China, and their alternative source of gas, if they can't buy it from Qatar, will be to purchase American LNG on the eastern seaboard, which was destined for Europe, and European markets will have to raise their prices in order to compete for that product. And that's really how we're going to be primarily affected. There's some long-term implications here. So GB has a declining gas continental shelf. It's unlikely we will be able to be self-sufficient anytime soon in gas, or ever again, really. Therefore, we're going to have to rely more on those American sources, Norway, or reduce our consumption of gas. So we would primarily traditionally say an increase in the price of gas and therefore power would be good for renewable projects. So theoretically, if you're capturing a higher price for your output, then this should make it easier to invest in those projects. But there are some caveats. So for example, if there is a very high price of gas, it's likely we'll see some demand destruction like we saw in the aftermath of the Ukrainian invasion. So does that actually reduce demand and therefore mean that even though it's very expensive to use fossil fuels, that's actually meant people are cutting back on consumption in general? So maybe there isn't actually enough demand to use those renewables. And additionally, another major impact is that if this increase in the price of gas will increase inflation. Inflation is managed through interest rates. Banks increasing interest rates will make it more expensive to invest in renewable projects by increasing the cost of capital. However, I would tend to say that that's probably outweighed by the increase in the price of gas. If we've seen a doubling of the price of gas, that's probably going to outweigh the impact of a 1 or 2% increase in the cost of capital for renewables projects. So I would say that this would spur on, or at least make those who are committed to renewables deployment more confident if it is a long, protracted conflict. So there are some significant headwinds just generally coming from a large increase in the price of gas to the overall economy. And really the only way of combating that is to use less gas, or at least use the gas we have remaining in our reserves and reservoirs more efficiently.
One of the things which I could come back to on this is obviously, you mentioned European gas and store, and the thing is, like, from an investment standpoint, there's been, admittedly, those discussions have been shelved for a while, but the idea of further investment in UK gas storage or strategic storage. So whether this re-engages that debate, I think is potentially one further consideration. Admittedly, it's not going to be something which can be done overnight. The idea of some form of state support for strategic storage or improving investment in storage, I think, it is certainly one further, like, overarching system level consideration. Bring it back to the point you made as far as investment is concerned, with one eye on how businesses could respond to this. I suppose what we saw previously in the instance of price volatility, high prices, is that a lot of projects from individual sites were somewhat reinvigorated by those price spikes. So I suppose there's that issue from both the macro and the, I don't want to use the term micro because it isn't micro per se, perspective of how would businesses react to this. I guess with that then comes the broader inflation, interest rate, macroeconomic, and how those two aspects of the potential consequences interact. That's quite an interesting one, I think, from a business standpoint, given respective companies' net zero targets and what expectations are on them. Bringing it back to bills, first and foremost domestic, with the default tariff cap, that is, for Q2, April to June, that's now set. So notionally, anything which occurs on the wholesale markets isn't going to have any impact on that. I think the July cap, ultimately, it's going to depend upon how long this goes on for and how volatile the wholesale market is. You've got a 3-month observation window to set the cap. I think the challenge for government certainly is what we had with the budget and the price cap coming down for a typical household. That being driven largely by the measures in the budget that we saw last November. This has the potential to effectively wipe out those policy changes. And that then, in terms of household bills, cost of living, is going to yield broader problems for the government. I guess, while noting that where the wholesale market is now is still well below what we saw 4 years ago with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there hasn't been, to my knowledge, any calls for government looking at broader support for households if energy bills rise sharply as a consequence of this. But I think there's a question as to, okay, could the government even afford to do that if it was in a position to do so? It doesn't look immediately possible that that's going to be the case. So there's that issue for government, that issue for the cost of living situation.
Testimony there to how well the global gas industry replumbed the system after
Yeah, yeah, because
the invasion of Ukraine. It was impressive in and of itself, but I imagine that if this had happened in 2018 or 19 or something like that, it would have been a similar shock to what we saw in Ukraine.
yeah.
And the system is more resilient now because of these new sources of supply, the additional LNG coming online, and there's European projects to kind of increase efficiency and use less gas has all kind of helped absorb some of that shock to an extent, I suppose.
Yeah, because you were looking at wholesale gas prices maxing out at, I think, north of £5 a therm 4 years ago. It does illustrate overarching or greater resilience of the global gas market. You also got much more American LNG than you had 4 years ago. So certainly from an overarching supply perspective, that certainly helped. And you've got a number of big LNG projects coming online this year as well, which will further improve that. But as you rightly say, that can't step in and just assume the role of Qatari LNG without there being broader impact on the wholesale market and in turn on bills. I think one of the other points I want to go back to is just giving some consideration to business energy costs as well. I mean, looking at when we are in the year, one would think that a large number of businesses would have largely contracted for the 26-27 financial year and had a lot of their volume exposure already locked in. I think there's going to be an issue as to those businesses which haven't fully covered their volumes, as well as those just simply from a pure financial standpoint of the larger businesses, the energy intensive, the larger energy users, how this is going to potentially play out for them. Those are businesses which, the energy intensives get support from the UK government under the energy intensive exemption scheme, the incoming British industrial competitiveness scheme as well. So there's a question again of, okay, well, if this is an enduring situation, is there possibly an argument for further government support to help those businesses? And again, it's a question of, okay, if that's going to be brought in, how is it going to be paid for? Who's going to foot the bill for that? I think the challenges to households and the challenges to businesses, the potential for those to get very large very quickly is very much apparent, but it will, as you say, depend upon whether or not this is a comparatively short-lived military situation or if it turns into something much more protracted.
And then there's also the impact on suppliers as well. So in the last price shock, there were a number of supplier exits, which I don't think we're due for this time. In the previous example, there was the situation where suppliers were either not hedged or hedged in the very short term, which meant they were exposed to those increases in prices and are unable to pass that on to their consumers. Whereas this time, there are more requirements on suppliers to hold credit and cash around, so they shouldn't be as exposed this time. And of course, the increase is lower, as we've mentioned. So I don't think we're due a kind of mass exodus from the market either, and any sort of additional costs from having to cover a failure, which was one of the kind of additions to bills that we shouldered from that period.
I agree completely on that. If you look at the administrator statements from the time that those suppliers left the market, A big chunk of them, it was down to hedging. It was down to the fact that for those with domestic books, the issue was they hadn't hedged in line with the default tariff cap methodology. I think now it's pretty much accepted that that is the case, so that there isn't that potential for variation around hedging strategies alongside, the underlying financial resilience requirements that you've mentioned that Ofgem have brought in. So, yeah, other things being equal, the possibility of large-scale supplier exits as a consequence of this situation would appear to be comparatively limited.
Hopefully, that gives everyone a bit of a grounding, and I'm sure events will continue apace. We'll keep you covered through the Daily Bulletin and Energy Spectrum. But hopefully, this was a interesting update for everyone.
Thank you, Tom.